You think you know how to play nice in the sandbox, but on the BCBA exam, collaboration really isn't about making friends. It's about medical necessity, ethical boundaries, and honestly, client survival.
It really is. I mean, it's the absolute core of clinical practice.
Mm.
If you misunderstand what collaboration actually means in the context of applied behavior analysis, you aren't just going to fail the exam.
Right.
You are going to fail your clients when you step into the real world.
And that is exactly the mission of this deep dive. So we are analyzing a stack of mock exam questions and the ethics code for behavior analysts today. Specifically, we're decoding BACB 6th edition task list item H.8.
Yes, the big one.
Yeah, the mandate to collaborate with others to support and enhance client services. And of course, we have to look at the related ethics codes like 2.0 and 3.06.
We're going to look at this through the lens of an elite clinician, because this is not about just, memorizing the code so you can pass a multiple choice test.
Right, nobody wants that.
Exactly. It is about understanding the underlying behavioral contingencies that actually govern how we interact with other professionals.
I completely agree. And, as I was digging into these mock exam questions, it really struck me how easily people can get tripped up on the very definition of collaboration.
No, it happens all the time.
Yeah, it seems like Pearson VUE has a very specific, rigorous standard for what counts as collaborating. So let's just start right there. What is the actual clear clinical reality of H.8 and Ethics Code 2.10?
So to put it plainly, H.8 and Code 2.9 mandate that we actively work with colleagues from our own profession as well as professionals from other fields.
Okay.
The code explicitly states that we compromise when possible, but we absolutely always prioritize the best interest of the client.
Always the client first.
Always. But here's the critical part that candidates miss. Collaboration, in the eyes of the board, is a documented clinical process.
Wait, document.
Yes, it requires documented actions and documented outcomes. It is not just, waving at the speech therapist in the hallway or having a casual chat in the break room.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And the sources actually give us a perfect applied ABA example to illustrate that exact distinction.
Let's hear it.
There is this mock exam question that asks the candidate to identify the best example of a professionally collaborative effort.
Classic format.
Yeah, and it gives options like interviewing a parent for an assessment, reviewing a physician's medication notes,
Yeah.
having a research assistant proctor, a baseline test, or working directly with a speech-language pathologist to establish communication skills.
And if you are thinking like an elite BCBA, the correct answer is immediately obvious. It's working with the SLP.
Right.
But the why is what really matters here. Interviewing a parent is incredibly important, obviously.
Of course.
But the board views that as part of the assessment process. It's not necessarily the interdisciplinary professional collaboration they are targeting with this specific task list item.
Ah, okay. And what about reviewing a doctor's notes?
That is gathering historical information. You aren't actively teaming up on delivery.
Okay. And having a research assistant proctor a test, because that one feels like a trap. I mean, a lot of candidates might look at that and think, well, two people are working together, so that's collaboration, right?
It is a massive trap. Having a subordinate run a program or proctor a test is not collaboration.
What is it then?
That is delegation. That is management. Teaming up with an SLP to establish communication skills, however, involves two distinct professionals actively combining their unique expertise to deliver client services.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it is a peer-to-peer negotiation regarding the intervention itself.
I really want to unpack that word negotiation. Because reading through these ethical guidelines, it feels like collaboration isn't just about being a yes man to a school district.
No, not at all.
Or like just nodding along with a speech therapist just to avoid making waves. It sounds more like we are required to be scientific translators.
I like that.
Right. Like you are insisting on translating the science of behavior into a shared multidisciplinary plan rather than just watering down the science so everyone gets along.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. You are translating the science. But let's take that metaphor a bit further, because to be a good translator, you need to understand the rules of both languages.
Yeah.
And, crucial point here, you need permission to speak in the room. Before you even sit down at that table with the SLP, true professional collaboration requires prerequisites.
You're talking about informed consent, right?
Exactly. Code 3.05. Before you share any data, before you brainstorm a single intervention, you must obtain informed consent from the parents or guardians to share that information across disciplines.
Okay, so that's step one.
Step one. Furthermore, once you're at the table, your translation of the science has to maintain its integrity. Any combined approach you build with that SLP must align with behavioral principles.
So you can't just throw out ADA just because you're in a team meeting.
Never. You are actively ensuring the behavioral integrity of the intervention while entirely respecting the SLP's scope of practice.
I see.
You don't tell them how to do oral motor exercises, and they don't tell you how to run a differential reinforcement schedule, but you figure out how those two things support the same ultimate client goal.
Which sounds beautiful in theory, honestly.
In theory.
But anyone who has ever stepped foot in a public school knows that this translation process can hit a brick wall.
Oh, absolutely.
And that brings up one of the most heavily tested concepts in these sources, navigating resistance and environmental constraints. So let's look at the classic middle school scenario.
Yes, the resistant teacher.
Right, exactly. So let's say you are a BCBA. You were called into a middle school to develop a behavior management strategy for a student with highly disruptive behavior.
Okay, setting the scene.
You walk in, you do your observations, and you quickly realize that the classroom teacher, let's call him Mr. T, is openly hostile to your presence.
We've all been there.
Yeah, he has very strong, completely non-behavioral opinions on what is best for his classroom, and he has zero interest in your data sheets.
Every single practicing BCBA has faced a version of Mr. T. And the exam writers know this.
They test it a lot.
Oh, yeah. They use this exact scenario to test your ability to navigate friction without falling into ego traps and, importantly, without violating the ethics of implementation.
I want to walk through the flawed strategies that candidates often choose here. Because honestly, if you are a young BCBA and you're feeling defensive, these incorrect multiple choice options look incredibly tempting.
They look like the right thing to do if you're stressed.
Right. My immediate human instinct in that situation would be to just pull rank, to say, look, I'm the board certified behavior analyst.
Yeah.
I designed the program and your job is to run it.
And if you choose that on the exam, you fail the question.
Wait, really? It's that black and white?
Yes. That approach is not only arrogant, it is clinically bankrupt. Relying on your title to force compliance completely ignores the behavioral contingencies operating on the teacher.
Oh, I had thought of it like that.
You are essentially trying to use a reprimand as an unconditioned punisher, assuming it will change his behavior. It won't. And an intervention that isn't implemented just doesn't exist.
Okay, so if I can't pull rank, what if I take the opposite approach?
Yeah.
I document that Mr. T is non-compliant. I tell the school district that the classroom is an unsupportive environment for the client, and I just withdraw services until the school trains him better.
We call that the ivory tower approach.
The ivory tower.
Yeah, you retreat to your office and blame the environment. But here's the huge problem with that. You cannot abandon the client simply because the adult in the room is difficult.
That makes sense.
Right. If you walk away, the client gets zero implementation. The exam wants to see you solve the clinical puzzle, not run from it.
Okay, so I can't force him, and I can't leave. What if I just ignore his complaints, sit in the back of the room, and write my conceptually systematic, perfectly cited, 40-page behavior intervention plan anyway?
Just ignore him entirely.
Yeah, I just write the perfect plan and hand it to the principal.
Then you have written a beautiful textbook that will just gather dust on a shelf.
Really?
Yes. This is where we have to talk about the relevance of behavior rule.
Let's get into that. Because usually, when I think of the relevance of behavior rule, I think of it as applying only to the client.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning we only target behaviors that are likely to be reinforced in the client's natural environment after the treatment ends. How does that apply to Mr. T?
So the underlying logic of that rule actually applies to the implementer as well.
Wait, the implementer?
Yes. If we design an intervention that the natural environment, in this case Mr. T, cannot or will not reinforce, then the intervention violates the realities of the setting.
Wow, okay.
The lack of support from a teacher isn't just like an annoyance. It is classified as a measurable environmental variable. You have to assess the teacher's behavior just as analytically as you assess the student's behavior.
That is a massive shift in perspective.
Yeah.
You're basically saying I need to figure out what Mr. T's motivating operations are.
Precisely. What does he want?
A quiet classroom.
Exactly. He probably wants a quiet classroom. He wants to get through his lesson plan without being interrupted. Your 40-page BIP that requires him to deliver a token every 30 seconds is just way too high of a response effort.
It competes with his existing contingency.
Exactly.
So on the exam, if I see a stakeholder resisting the plan, The strategy is to identify the answer that actively involves collaborating to find an effective, realistic strategy.
Yes. You compromise on the response effort. You literally ask him what is feasible for you to do right now.
Right.
You design an intervention that actually survives the natural environment. That is the clinical leverage point here. You can design the most heavily researched BIP in the history of the world, but if the natural environment lacks the willingness to run it, your intervention is clinically useless.
You have to compromise on the logistics so the science can survive.
Beautifully said.
Thanks. But, that word compromise is incredibly dangerous when we move into transdisciplinary teams.
Yeah.
Especially when pseudoscience gets introduced.
Oh, this is the deep water now.
Because sometimes collaboration hits a hard ethical wall.
And this is exactly where the exam separates the good test takers from the truly elite clinicians. Code 2.1 Euro mandates collaboration, yes. But Code 2.01 mandates providing effective treatment.
Right. Effective treatment.
We have a fundamental, non-negotiable ethical obligation to rely on scientific knowledge and evidence-based practices. We can compromise on response effort. We absolutely cannot compromise on the science.
Let's use a very real scenario from the source material to make this concrete.
Let's do it.
So you are working with an adolescent with an autism diagnosis. The team is sitting around an IEP table. An occupational therapist, or perhaps the parents, bring in a printed article about a strict gluten and casein-free diet.
Classic.
Or maybe they want the team to implement facilitated communication, and they look right at you and say, we want this integrated into the behavior plan.
This is the ultimate test of your behavioral intelligence.
Right. So I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to be collaborative. If the code says I have to compromise, doesn't it make sense to just include a little bit of what they want?
No.
Just like sprinkle a little pseudoscience into the BIP to keep the peace, maintain rapport, and make sure I still have a job tomorrow?
Absolutely not. That is a fatal error on the exam, and it's a fatal error in practice.
Okay, tell me why.
You cannot introduce non-scientifically based interventions as part of a behavior analytic treatment plan. If you do, you are directly violating Code 2.01.
Right, providing effective treatment based on science.
Yes, and furthermore, you cannot implement non-behavioral services unless you have the formal credentials to do so. A diet is a medical intervention that is wildly outside our scope of practice.
But if I look at them across the table and say, well, your diet is invalid, facilitated communication has been debunked for decades, and your views are unscientific,
Yeah.
I have just nuked my relationship with the family and the school.
And that is the other trap Pearson v. UE wants to see if you will fall into.
The trap of being right but mean.
Exactly. Alienating the team by loudly declaring their deeply held beliefs are untrue or garbage is a massive failure of clinical tact. It destroys the collaborative relationship.
Yeah, nobody wants to work with that person.
And when you destroy that relationship, you lose your seat at the table. If you aren't at the table, who is protecting the client's behavioral needs?
Literally no one.
No one.
So how do you thread that needle? What is the actual exam logic when you are presented with a non-evidence-based treatment?
Here is the strategy. If you see a proposed treatment that lacks scientific validity, you look for the answer that allows you to offer your evidence-based behavior analytic plan alongside their therapy, assuming, of course, their therapy is physically safe and not harmful to the client.
Okay. Alongside, but not merged.
Right. Or you look for the option where you politely decline to implement the unproven therapy yourself while calmly explaining the lack of scientific validation.
But probably not in front of everyone, right?
Exactly. Preferably in a private, respectful setting.
Yeah.
You stay strictly in your lane.
Okay, let's play that out. The parents say, we are doing the gluten-free diet. I say, I hear you. As a behavior analyst, I cannot prescribe or implement a dietary intervention.
Perfect so far.
However, since you are implementing at home, what I can do is rigorously track the frequency of the target behavior. We will let the data tell us if there is a functional relation over the next month.
That is brilliant clinical execution. You are collaborating on the assessment of the environment without endorsing the pseudoscience itself.
You are honoring the relationship, but you're holding the line on the science.
Exactly. The high-level takeaway here is defining the boundaries of compromise. Compromise applies to logistics, it applies to scheduling, and it applies to prioritizing goals.
Right.
You and the OT can compromise on whether to work on shoe tying or toothbrushing first, but it does not apply to the scientific integrity of applied behavior analysis. You never compromise on whether to use a validated reinforcement schedule versus, say, crystal therapy.
Logistics, not science. I really like how clean that line is. But There is another area in these sources where collaboration gets incredibly sticky, and it has to do with the business side of our field.
Oh yeah, the business side.
We need to talk about referrals, third-party contracts, and conflicts of interest. This pulls in codes 3.06, 3.08, and 1.11.
This is where the business of ABA often collides head-on with the ethics of ABA, and young clinicians are highly vulnerable here.
Why is that?
Because the contingencies of the business world encourage behaviors that the ethics code explicitly prohibits.
Let's ground this in a real example.
Huh.
Say you have a client and the family clearly needs a referral for a physical therapist or like a clinical psychologist.
Okay.
Now, you happen to know a fantastic professional whose office is right next door to your clinic. In the business world, networking is just smart. So you refer the family to the guy next door. What is the danger there?
The danger lies in multiple relationships and conflicts of interest. Navigating referrals requires strict adherence to code 3.06.
I imagine the biggest trap here is the kickback.
Right? Absolutely. The idea that a friend, family member, or colleague will give you a referral fee or a finder's fee for sending a client their way.
Which happens in normal business all the time.
Right. In standard business, that is affiliate marketing. In clinical practice, it is a blatant conflict of interest.
Because it clouds your clinical judgment. Like, are you referring the client because they need that specific PT, or are you referring them because you want a cut of the fee?
Precisely. Your motivation is no longer purely the client's best interest. When making a referral, the board expects you to ideally provide multiple options.
Not just one.
Exactly. And if you have any relationship with the provider, even if it is just that you share an office building or you play golf on the weekends, you must explicitly disclose that relationship to the client.
Wow, even just sharing a building.
Yes, full transparency. And you absolutely cannot accept a fee or an incentive for a referral. The safest exam route, and honestly the only ethical clinical route, is to avoid kickbacks entirely.
Let's shift from referrals to the other major business conflict, third-party contracts.
Yeah.
Code 3.08. We see this constantly with insurance companies or school districts.
The funders.
Exactly. Let's say I do a comprehensive assessment. The data shows this client needs 20 hours a week of medically necessary ABA to make meaningful progress and stay safe. I submit the plan.
Okay.
The insurance company, the third-party funder, comes back and says, well, we're only authorizing 10 hours.
This is a scenario that tests your professional courage.
Let me push back on this, playing the role of a stressed-out, overworked supervisee. If the insurance company pays the bills, don't they make the rules?
No.
But if I fight them, they might drop the client entirely, or my clinical director might get mad at me for causing a scene. Doesn't collaboration mean I have to work with the funder or you just accept the 10 hours?
No, and that is a fundamental misunderstanding of your ethical duty that will absolutely cost you on the exam, and it will harm your clients.
Okay, tell me why.
Your ultimate duty is to the direct recipient of services, the client. A third party is just the entity funding the service. If an insurance company requests a reduction in hours that is incompatible with your data-driven clinical recommendations, you do not just smile and say, okay, thanks.
Because if you do, you are agreeing to provide a dosage of treatment that you already know is ineffective, which, I guess, violates Code 2.01 again.
Exactly. You are ethically required to resolve the conflict in the best interests of the client.
So what does that actually look like? If I see a scenario on the exam where a funder wants to cut services against my recommendations, what is the exact strategic move?
You choose the answer where you advocate for the client by pushing back with data. You do not just argue. You provide the graph data proving medical necessity.
You bring the science to the table.
Always. You request peer-to-peer reviews. You try everything to resolve the conflict with the funder based on the science. If they absolutely refuse, you document every step of that process.
Document everything.
Yes. And ultimately, if the artificially reduced level of service is so low that you cannot ethically or safely provide treatment, you may have to transition or discharge the client.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
But the underlying principle is crystal clear. Your loyalty is to the client's medical necessity.
Completely.
It is not to the funding source's bottom line, and it's certainly not to your own desire to avoid a difficult phone call. You are the final line of defense for that client's right to effective treatment.
And that requires a massive amount of clinical backbone. As we said at the beginning, collaboration is not just smiling and nodding.
Right.
Sometimes collaboration is a highly professional, data-driven debate where you politely but firmly refuse to yield on what the client actually needs to survive and thrive in their environment.
Which brings us full circle. You might think you know how to play nice in the sandbox, but true Board-certified collaboration means making sure that Sandbox is actually safe, scientifically sound, and built for the long-term success of the client.
Precisely. So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on today. Think about your current caseload right now. Look at the other professionals involved in your clients' lives. The teachers, the SLPs, the OTs, the pediatricians.
A lot of moving parts.
Right. Are you truly collaborating with them? Are you engaging in the hard work of translating the science, designing interventions that survive their natural environments, and holding the line on evidence-based practice? Or are you just working in parallel silos, occasionally waving at each other across the room while the client falls through the cracks? True behavioral intelligence means bridging that gap without ever compromising the integrity of the data.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. www.amethysttherapyservices.com, info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
Remember that sandbox metaphor isn't just a joke. When you walk into an IEP meeting or a clinical review with an insurance company or a hostile classroom, you aren't there to make friends. You are there to architect a survival plan for a human being. The tools you use to build it, collaboration, compromise on logistics, and unyielding scientific integrity are what separate the test passers from the life changers. Stay analytical, stay ethical, and we will see you on the next deep dive.